that we can take into the start of Monster Hunter Rise Sunbreak to take on the early Master Rank monsters. Of course, as we get Master Rank armor, these builds will be replaced, but nonetheless, these pre-Sunbreak builds are aimed to give you a good head start. Now before we get into the video, a reminder that if you enjoy these builds or find them useful, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on the video, as we try to bring you a variety of builds for a variety of games that cater to a wide variety of playstyles. Now, when it comes to the Sword and Shield, it is in a good place in Monster Hunter Rise. It's a strong weapon, but it still maintains its jack-of-all-trades aspect, meaning that it can be built in a variety of ways. Whether you like defense, offense, quality of life, the Sword and Shield can excel when it comes to creating a build based on these aspects. But when it comes to this pre-Sunbreak build, I'm focusing on a DPS ailment build, namely a poison build. This is because rarely is a monster completely immune to the poison ailment, and it gives us two ways to play the Sword and Shield in all honesty. We'll start off by using our sword attack combos to trigger the poison ailment before switching over to the shield attacks that focus on KO and benefit more from raw attack. So for this poison sword and shield build, we'll need the following armor pieces. First of all, you'll need the Kaiser Crown, then the Nargacuga Mail S, Rathalos Braces S, Anjanath Coil S, and the Ingot Greaves S. I'm also using an Absolute Petalace, although this is down to personal preference. I've gone for the Absolute Petalace for the health boost. And then when it comes to your talisman, this is down to what you have available to you, unfortunately. However, the talisman is kind of important with this build. You need a talisman with at least weakness exploit level 2 attached to it, and then at least a tier 2 decoration slot. Alternatively, you could have a lower weakness exploit rating with more decoration slots, but for the most part you want to try to get something similar. The talisman I'm using has weakness exploit level 2 attached to it, slugger level 1, which is a byproduct. It's not really needed, although it can be useful when it comes to our shield attacks for knocking out a monster. And then it has a tier 3 decoration slot and a tier 1 decoration slot attached to it. And then as for your weapon, I'm using the Queen's Rapier, which is the Rathian Sword and Shield. This has an attack boost rampage skill attached to it. Now if you wanted to go for more raw damage, you could forego the Queen Rapier and thus drop the poison element of this build and go with the Tigrex Sword and Shield, which will give you more raw attack as well as white sharpness, but in order to keep that white sharpness, you'll have to counter it with other skills. Nonetheless, I went for poison, as it allows us to deal a decent amount of unseen damage to a monster. So when it comes to the decorations, you've got a few to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for Grinder Jaws to max out speed sharpening. I've then gone for Critical Jaws to max out crit boost, Venom Jaws to max out poison attack, Tenderizer Jaws to max out weakness exploit, and then a Brace Jaw for a point in flinch free. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 283 raw attack with a poison rating of 38. You'll also have a decent chunk of blue sharpness with 50% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when we take into account weakness exploit. And you'll have an OK defense of 487 that is strong against fire, neutral against ice, but slightly weak to the other elements. As for the switch skills, these are down to personal preference once more. I say it's down to personal preference, especially when it comes to Sunbreak, as the skill swap allows us to pretty much use the majority of switch skills in our arsenal. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have Critical Eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build. You'll then have Attack Boost at level 6. It would have been nice to get this to level 7, but nonetheless Attack Boost at level 6 increases our raw attack, and at level 4 or above, it increases our raw attack by a percentage on top of that. You'll then have Crit Boost at level 3, increasing the damage of our critical hits, but this only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portion, so it won't do anything when it comes to the poison attacks. You'll then have Weakness Exploit at level 3, increasing our affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. Weakness Exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us a bonus 50% extra affinity, getting us to that 100% affinity when we're being accurate with our attacks. You'll then have Poison Attack at level 3, increasing the poison rating and build up of the ailment on this build, allowing us to poison monsters more easily. But remember, with this build the poison ailment can only be applied with the sword attacks, not the shield attacks. You'll then have Speed Sharpening at level 3, increasing how quickly we can sharpen our weapon, countering any issues we may have with the blue sharpness. You'll then have Slugger at level 1, a byproduct of our talisman we're using. You may not have it on your build, but increases how effectively we can KO a monster, and this will be a boon to our shield attacks, as the shield attacks are classed as blunt and can knock out monsters. You'll then have Evade Window at level 1, another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but it's still useful as it increases our invincibility frames when we perform dodges and such. And then you'll have Flinch Free at level 1. Flinch Free is a skill that allows us to ignore minor knockbacks from monsters and especially our allies. So there we have it, that's the Pre-Sunbreak build I'd recommend for the Sword and Shield. Obviously it does lean more towards damage than anything else, but it has more nuance than a straightforward raw attack damage build. The goal is to go up to a monster, perform the sword attack until you notice the monster is poisoned. You can tell this by the purple frothing around its mouth, and then you'll switch over to your shield attacks, which will deal more damage and allow you to potentially KO the monster, crowd controlling it. Once the poison wears off, you repeat the process, and normally by the third application of poison, the monster is on its deathbed. But every build out there has its pros and cons. When it comes to this build, its biggest pro, again, is its damage output. When you look at one side of the coin, say just the raw attack, it may not be the best, but when you combine the poison element combined with what raw attack we have on this build, its damage output is quite significant. On top of that, this build can be used against pretty much any monster in the game. Like I said, rarely is a monster completely immune to the poison element. Yes, okay, it means that we may not be able to poison the likes of Raffi and Rathalos, Puke often, but the vast majority of other monsters can be poisoned. And this, coupled with the high raw attack, means that we can take this against most of the monsters we come across at the start of Sunbreak. And the final pro is that this build has a very high affinity. It was able to reach that 100% affinity, meaning that it's going to add to our overall DPS. But alas, there are cons. One of the biggest cons for this build is, unfortunately, it does lack defensive skills. But this is countered thanks to the switch skills, which can allow us to ignore or counter monster attacks, as well as the shield, which can still be used in a pinch to block monster attacks. And the final con is, unfortunately, even though we have a decent chunk of blue sharpness, there may be times where we burn through this quite quickly, so sharpness can be an issue. This is countered slightly thanks to speed sharpening, but it's still something to be aware of. But regardless of the pros and cons, this is still an effective and fun build to use for the Sword and Shield, especially if you do like to use ailments. It is also a build that can kind of keep up with the Valstrax armor sets, but means that we don't have to worry about the health reduction aspects that those builds have. On top of that, this build can be quite fun, as it almost has two playstyles, going from attacking from your sword to attacking with your shield, making it for me a little bit more interesting and fun to use. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you a pre-Sunbreak build for the Sword and Shield in Monster Hunter Rise. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.